Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our live discussion with Professor Yossi Sheffi about his new book, The New Abnormal: Reshaping Business and Supply Chain Strategy Beyond COVID-19. My name is Melissa Geringer. I oversee corporate communications for Resolink, and I'm going to quickly run through some housekeeping items before turning it over to our moderator, Bill Hurles. First, following our discussion, we'll be opening it up for a Q&A, so please use the question tab to send in your questions at any time throughout the webinar. And I'm also super excited to announce that we're going to be giving away 20 signed copies of Mr. Sheffi's book. So everyone here today will be entered in a drawing, kind of a virtual fishbowl, if you will, and the first 20 names pulled will win a book. We'll plan to reach out to the winners via email after the webinar to coordinate things. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to our moderator, Bill Hurles. Bill is a well-known, highly respected, and passionate leader in the supply chain management community. He leads Resolink's Global Supply Chain Resiliency Council and is the former executive director of supply chain for General Motors. While at GM, Bill led the automaker through many high-risk events and implemented many new processes to reduce potential impact. Welcome, Bill.
Well, thank you. And it's, I want to welcome Yossi Sheffi, as we just mentioned. Yossi is the professor of engineering systems at MIT, and he's the director of the MIT Center for Transportation and Logistics. Today, we're going to have the privilege of getting his perspectives on his most recent book, most recent of 3 publications he's made around supply chain resiliency. So with that, I welcome Yossi and look forward to our discussion here to begin now.
Thank you very much, Bill, and hello, everybody. So let me start by showing you the book. It's the talk is basically focused on some of the pandemic and some what might happen beyond the pandemic, but it's the new abnormal, as is the name of the book. So let's dive right into it. So there are many disruptions. The pandemic, of course, is not the only disruption. But I like to think about Tolstoy when I think about disruption. He wrote in Anna Karenina, happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. And when I think about disruptions, of course, they're all different. Everything comes from different reasons, different causes, different impacts. No two are the same. Yet, the management, the preparation for disruption, the prevention, the detection, the response are all generic. They're very similar regardless of the type of disruption. So first of all, let's talk now, let's not talk about preparation, but let's talk about the management of disruptions. And crisis management in general has the following steps, which most companies have taken during the pandemic. Companies have set up an emergency management center. Now, these centers used to be physical space with a lot of screen around the room. They are now become virtual, but all the information decision-making happen in one place. Companies, and especially CEOs, had to communicate obsessively, and good companies did, understanding that they communicate even when they don't have all the answers. It's much preferred to communicate frequently rather than completely, because you never have all the answers. The uncertainty is so great with this. And saying that these are the things that I know, these are the things that I don't know, and telling everybody from employees to the suppliers to customers to the market to Wall Street is very helpful. Now, we talk about decision making and what happened in the emergency operations center. People call it the tower, people call it different names. But the important thing is not to jump into each other's business. Let the supply chain do their thing. Let the marketing do their thing. Let the communication do their thing. GM, after the Japan disaster, started calling it swim your own lane. Don't jump into other people's business, because products and supply chains are complicated animals, and you have to know what you're doing, and you have to be a specialist and have deep knowledge in the subject matter. Companies have been reviewing suppliers. This is something that's, of course, very important, because you have to know who has the who is the capacity, who is now cutting corners on quality, who is in financial trouble. Companies also in many cases would not have enough product or enough parts to make all the product or enough product to serve all customers. And the question is, how do you prioritize? Which customer get the stuff that other people don't? And how do you make this decision? In the book, I devote some time to providing a framework of how to think about it, which customers to prioritize and which would not. Of course, we are going into recession and cash is king, but one has to be, of course, careful not to lengthen terms of payment to suppliers too much, because you endanger them. They also have a problem with cash, and you don't pay them on time, on reasonable time, it may come back to bite you, of course. Many companies have reduced the number of SKUs. General Mills, for example, reduced the number of Progresso soups from 90 to 50 varieties during the pandemic. That's still, they did not go back up to 90 or beyond. They're still at 50 or so. And this is done for two reasons. During the pandemic, it's done to make sure that the best sellers are kept on the supermarket shelf. Later, you realize that it also cuts costs because you have less changeovers. So both production is smoother and cost is lower. So you keep doing this. And by the way, this was done in many previous recessions, not to that extent, but it was done. And finally, people plan for recovery. And this is an opportunity to find out, in a crisis, you find out who are the good customers, who are the good suppliers, where the relationships stand the test of time. And it should give you a cause for a pause. And who do you want to continue relationship? Which supply chain channels you want to continue? Which customer you want to serve? Which region of the world you want to serve? Where do you want to buy and sell stuff? And companies are going, many good companies are going to strategy session trying to determine exactly that. Now, talk about the shape of the recovery. Actually, only China went to a V recovery. They went sharply up, sharply down, and immediately up. The rest of the world is not. It's more right now more like an L recovery, down and staying down, but going up and down also. I think about it in terms of a spatial dimension to recovery, and I call it a whack-a-mole recovery. What we are likely to have is random flare-up and shutdown and reopening around the world in random times and random regions, just like the whack-a-mole children game. When moles come out of the ground, you have to hit them with a mallet. Of course, create a significant challenge for supply chain managers. At the same time, in the United States, we still see people getting together and getting infected. This is and we are going into the Thanksgiving period, so I hope we'll come out of it kind of okay. How did we deal with 9/11? 9/11, there was fear of flying, so we created safe zones through the testing, through the check-in, to the TSA. When you come into the airport or some countries, shopping mall, sports arena, you get checked, so you know when you are in, you're in a safe environment. And this allows people to start flying. Post-COVID, we have the same problem. We have to create minimal infection danger or relatively safe zones. How do we do it? By testing, by taking temperature, by quarantining people who are sick. This, in fact, is a new competitive advantage for companies who do it well. Companies who invest in this and do it well will allow people to come faster to the office, to work together, and to be more productive. Now, who did COVID-19 hit? People we know, the weak, the people with comorbidity conditions. Same thing with companies. Companies who were weak before, already deteriorating, over-leveraged, were hit. Look at the US department store. What happened is this is the revenue at March 1999. So 20-some years ago, over $30 billion. It kept going down and down and down. It reached about $11 billion before the pandemic, and now it's less than 8. Lots of companies are just exiting the business because the business model was not sustainable in the age of Amazon and others. Now, companies did fabulously well, some in adjusting the new normal. in serving the national needs. So auto companies were started making ventilators. Flex also started making ventilators. Other companies started making masks. In fact, New Balance, the shoe and athletic apparel maker, started making masks. Over about a long weekend, they started making masks and distribute them for free. And this is your truly wearing the New Balance mask, which look like it's made of from shoe stuff, and you see how it's made. Etsy by April had 60,000 people selling masks on their site, and 3M quadrupled its manufacturing of its production of N95, the gold standard of masks. Many companies made a lot of adjustments. So Burberry, for example, could not get people in the store, so you can get customer service representative live showing you stuff that you can buy and how to use it with other stuff. Savas is a company that makes, the Nashville company that makes custom leather jackets. And these are actually little videos that show you how to take measurements so they can supply you with exact leather jackets, custom made. Sephora, which used to have people, women coming to, not only women, people coming to the store, and the customer service representative would show them how to use the product, are now doing it online. And IKEA went one step further in that you can go to the website and using virtual reality or augmented reality, you can put a piece of furniture in your room and see what it's going to look like. Again, and then you can, of course, order it online. E-commerce took off big time. This is a Q2 by July number revenues. You see Walmart, while up only 90% in sale, almost double its e-commerce revenue. Target triple its e-commerce revenue. Of course, Amazon, JD.com, Alibaba, the native e-commerce company did very well. But also companies like Shopify that doubled its business, and by June had 1.3 million customers. These are retailers, by small and medium-sized retailers who use the Shopify to get online and to do everything, to get into the e-commerce game very quickly. Even Facebook start getting into the e-commerce game. One of the starting things during the pandemic was how quickly companies adopted a lot of new technology. It's not so much that the new technology was developed that quickly, it was, but the amazing thing was how many companies adopted, how fast they adopted new technology. Suddenly, long legal review, long financial review went out the window, and company just adopted all kind of system, whether it's connectivity or visibility. Connectivity, of course, everybody adopted the, whether it's Zoom or WebEx or Teams, or I've been on about 10 of those. Of course, develop visibility solution, develop all kind of computation method, big data, large scale optimization, and everybody went to the cloud. So because this allows actually faster adoption of software. Of course, we saw a lot of automation, whether it's a continued developing and testing of autonomous trucking, sidewalk robots, which are already working in some city and delivering pizza and other goods. Last mile drones, there's still very strong push for last mile drones. That doesn't happen yet in American cities, but it happens in other parts around the world. Drones are already working in the warehouse in terms of taking inventory, just flying all around and taking inventory. And there's a big, push to RPA, robotic process automation. It's companies like insurance companies have adopted it wholesale, and many of the dealing with all kind of customer interaction, you're dealing with a computer. You're not dealing with a human being, and the computer even makes decision on simple stuff. We get out of the idea of signing the bill of lading, and now we can do it wirelessly. So a lot of these things have been adopted wholesale and quickly. So one example of a company that actually does well in this, crazy uncertainty. If you think about DC networks, there are, if you invest in a network, it's asset intensive, or you do a long-term contract, and it's a customized design. You know where you want your warehouse for today's business. Of course, the situation is e-commerce is surging and the business is changing. Furthermore, you are competing with Amazon. Amazon is difficult to compete against. Why? If you look at Amazon right now, they have about 83% of the e-commerce business. In 2 or 3 years, they'll have close to 50%. They have the widest selection, the lowest price, and the fastest delivery, because there's so many warehouses that are close to the customers. And this is just comparison of fulfillment center between Amazon and the closest competitors in the United States. But it took them 20 years to build it and $40 billion. It's very hard to catch them. How do you do it? So how do you compete with a network like this that Amazon has, that basically has fulfillment center close to every population center? Well, as a company that looked at the warehouses, some of them are too much space because there are startups that sign long-term contract or build a warehouse, they don't need it, seasonality, the business is not yet as up as they thought. And some businesses need more space because, seasonality or some promotion, or they are growing, declining, they need to change. So a company called Flexe did the following. They signed an agreement with over 1,000 warehouses, distribution center all over the United States, and they have their own operating system, warehouse management system ties to a logistic and distribution system that they put side by side with a local warehouse management system, whatever it is. And then companies can simply decide that they want to get stuff in certain location. So this, in fact, think about this as the Airbnb of warehousing, or the cloud computing of warehousing, where things are happening in the cloud, or things are happening, as I say, you order an Airbnb and you look at location and you see if there's room there or not. It's all on the system. The pluses of this is it's massive, 1,000 warehouses. Who has 1,000 warehouses? Amazon doesn't have even half of that. If you are a customer of this, there's no startup cost. You just can start. It takes them about 10 days to get you into a warehouse and to set you up on the system. There's no fixed cost. You're paying, by the glass rather than by the bottle. You have the same technology platform everywhere. So you look at all your inventory and you see what's going on around the country. You can open it anywhere in the world. Not in the world. They're right now only in North America. But you can open it only in the United States, and they're getting into Canada. You have one view of the inventory. As I say, you can you can get up quickly, and it offers you flexibility. You can close one and open one depending on what your business is like. So if you start with one warehouse in the middle of the country, and then you need, one in and then you need to replace it with one closer to the West Coast and one closer to the East Coast, you close this one, you open these two. You can also test something else. If you want to know what will happen if I will offer in the Midwest, for example, 1-day delivery at a certain price point, it's just very hard to know what will be the lift. How much lift am I going to get? But you can test it. You can simply ask Flexe to get into a warehouse near Cleveland, let's say, and put your some of your SKU there and advertise them in the Cleveland area, and say that this is that price point. It's within 1 day or even a few hours, you get and see what is the lift with this kind of level of service. This is hard to do without a system like this. They also offer some fulfillment services, transportation, visibility, and a lot of analytics. Let's change now and go back to what happened during the pandemic. One of the things that did not work very well, I thought, was the media. The media became a little hysterical. Talk about the failure of supply chain, the end of just-in-time, the end of reliance on China. Let's check each one of those. Failure of supply chain, really? I would say it was their finest hour. Why do I say that? Think about the food supply chain. Suddenly, within literally few days, all restaurants were closed, no institution, universities, industrial park, everything was closed. And this is half the food that goes in big packages on pallets to this institution. Not only this, the item consumed were changed. People will stop buying fresh food and bought more canned food and more bread and pasta and comfort food. Plant closure here and there, and still there was no really food shortage, despite the fact that sometimes you didn't have the right cut of meat, or you had to buy only two cartons of eggs, or you could buy other stuff. Even if your favorite flavor of granola was not there, there was something else. So it was not the end of the world. Now, the media, of course, show picture like this, and I was talking to several journalists who were taking them, asking, I know what you did. You came just before the store closed and took the picture. Because if you come up in the morning, you see a picture like this. They didn't understand the whole process of replenishing the supermarket. The fact that it happens overnight, and you come in the morning and everything is full. So anyway, so I still say that supply chain by and large deserved the trophy for being great. Unbelievable adjustment with one proviso. The medical supply chain, specifically of PPEs, completely fell on its face. This is not an issue for companies. This is mostly issue for government, because we used to have a strategic reserve of medical supply, was built during the Clinton administration, enhanced significantly during the Bush administration, completely drawn down during the Obama administration, and the Trump administration didn't pay attention to it. So we got to where we got. But that's something for I talk about a lot in the book, of how to do it and how to fix it. In fact, just in time, the end of just in time, again, I don't think so. The Toyota production system, which sometimes it's being interchangeable with just in time, is a huge improvement in manufacturing, and it does call for minimal inventory, but also it results on resilience and flexibility, because you are tied to your customers, you are tied to your suppliers who can communicate and respond to demand changes very quickly. It also led to high quality. You could identify flaws before you had to run the whole inventory pile, and if you found a problem, you couldn't go to the pile and get one from there. You had to find out what's wrong. It led to low waste, to worker participation, lots of good stuff, which resulted in low cost, high quality product. We all remember the time when Toyota came up with the system and the US had to convince the Japanese to put voluntary quotas on cars, because the American could not adjust fast enough. Getting out of China, again, I'm not sure people are getting out of China. At least that's not what my research shows. Now, many companies are not in China due only to low cost. Costs in China are going up. They're in China, those that are in China due to low cost, like garment manufacturing, have been moving out of China for more than a decade now. They're moving to Sri Lanka, they're moving to Bangladesh, because these are the final stage of garment manufacturing is cutting and sewing that involves lots of manual labor and not significant capital investment. The textile, for example, is going up. China is exporting more and more textile because it's a very sophisticated, capital-intensive product. And the same thing about automotive, high-tech, aviation. The important thing is that company spent decades and billions of dollars of develop whole ecosystem of supplier and their supplier and their supplier in China. It's not easy to find somewhere else that ecosystem. Some companies may balance procurement in China with what's called China plus one strategy, moving to Western supplier or most likely Vietnamese, Malaysian, Indonesian suppliers. At the same time, some Western companies are thinking about, they don't want to be stuck in US or Germany. They want to be maybe in China or somewhere in Asia. And lastly, don't forget that China is still a very large and growing market. In fact, right now, it's the only attractive market we have, given they came out of the pandemic so quickly. Finally, I want to mention some issues of concern as we come out of the pandemic. The first one is sustainability. Sustainability, I wrote a book about sustainability before the last one, and found out that despite what people are telling pollsters, when you check actually in the supermarket, in the pollster, people are saying 70% of consumers are willing to pay more for this or that or be inconvenient. That's just not the case. I mean, it's when push comes to shove, people still prefer convenience and low cost, and mostly that's how they buy it. They're about 5 to 7% in the U.S., and I have figures from Massachusetts, which is one of the most progressive states in the U.S. But 5 to 7% will buy sustainable if it costs 3 to 5% more. But it's not only the U.S. When the French government trying to put carbon tax, Paris was burning. It was, about 2% extra on the price of gas in France. The Australian government failed. People are just, despite all the talk, are not willing to do it. And as we are going into a deep recession, and many people lost their job, it's looked like they're going to focus more on economics rather than sustainability, and it's really too bad. Because at the same time, companies, again, despite all the pronouncement, cannot invest significantly if the customers are not willing to pay a little more. And governments just don't have the money. They spend so much on fighting COVID, and the fact that they cannot go against the citizen, they'll be voted out. Anyway, so this is a problem. Another problem, people are talking about the end of globalization. I think there'll be new labor globalization, because if my office is in Boston and I can work from Kansas City or Miami, I can also work from Buenos Aires or Delhi. And the problem, the people who can work from home are the white collar, high salary people. When they move out of the country, the taxes are moved with them. So it's not anymore I'm worried it's not anymore the, customer service representative that are calling from India, but it's high wage earners that take the tax base with them. And the result will be that countries already doing this, by the way, might compete on low taxes, which of course erodes the tax base everywhere. We saw a lot of inequality exposed in broadband education, and some people call it the K recovery. People who are white collar workers are doing just fine. They work from home. They don't need to go to the office every day. Blue collar worker, people who work in the factories, in the warehouse, driving the trucks, working in the supermarkets, are actually losing. Furthermore, there's inequality between countries, as we see Western countries, the US, EU, Japan, China, can invest a lot in mitigating many of the effects of disruption, as these countries did. And however, countries in Africa don't have the resources, don't have the healthcare base, don't have the economic resources, so they are falling further and further behind. We see a rise in populism and nationalism. Again, all these things started before, but been accelerated. And you can look at whatever you want, whichever is the flavor of the month, but we see a lot of it, of course. Industrial concentration, this is now starting to get some attention. The big is getting bigger. Nowhere is it more true than in tech. And the problem is that tech companies are offering entrepreneurs a lot of money to buy them out, which means in many cases, they just make sure that there's no competition. And this long term, it may hurt innovation in the United States. The media with all the fake news, and we're bifurcating completely. I mean, I was stunned to see that Fox is losing lots of its audience to extreme right-wing outlets. So we are just bifurcating more and more, and not clear how the country can be governed and how this will work. Finally, think about the next pandemic. This pandemic is bad enough, but it's not nearly as deadly as Ebola, where 50% of the people who got it died, or SARS, when 30% of the people who got it died. There could be pandemics which are more contagious and certainly deadlier. When we come out of this, I hope that we will not say, "Oh, you know, we avoided this bullet, but and forget about it." Lots of other stuff can come out of the woodwork, or out of the wet market in China, whatever. So let me end here and open it up for questions. These are all my books. That the bottom three are the book that Bill mentioned, the book that dealing with resilience, and finally the last book, The New Abnormal. And finally you have the my website URL that you can go to, and there's a lot more material on this. So let me stop here and turn it back to Bill.
Okay, thanks, Yossi. Great presentation, and you know what I'm fascinated by is this book, just like your previous books, you do such a great job of providing specific examples that reinforce some of the fundamentals that you've laid out in your previous books. So well done, and obviously very, very timely.
Thank you.
The first question I'd have for you, and I do remind the audience, please text in your questions. Melissa mentioned earlier the introduction. You can do that. I'll pick those up and incorporate those in our Q&A session here for the next 20 minutes or so. So please do that. Hey, my first question I'd have for you is, Yossi, as you look at this pandemic and compare it to previous global supply chain disruptions, how do you see this one different? What are some key characteristics and/or lessons learned that might be different from the Japan earthquake or the Thailand flood, etc.?
Yeah. Well, there's several fundamental differences. First of all, that it hits everywhere. I mean, the fact that the usual disruption happened in a place, even Japan, which was a big disruption, happened in Japan. The disruption itself, the manufacturing was not impacted in other parts of the world, aside from parts that did not come from Japan. But you can follow the supply chain. If you have a mapping of the supply chain, you know which parts are going to be affected. That's one thing. Here we are having a worldwide phenomenon. The second one is the impact on demand. The fact that there was such a change for some industries, the impact on demand was really. I mentioned the food industry, but there are many industries where the impact was, some went down, some went significantly up, some was, depending, some item went up, some item went down. So the changes in demand is something that we have not seen in other. The challenge in other cases was to supply existing demand when we didn't have enough supply. In Japan, in Evonik, certain other, we suddenly didn't have enough parts to fulfill existing, but we know what the demand is. Here, the demand is completely, new and changing all the time. It's a whack-a-mole recovery, go up and down in different parts of the world. So that's something that we have not seen before.
As I think about it, that's probably the area that I see so different this time, is that what suppliers have been impacted is so broad. Often it was an area or an industry, et cetera, that was impacted. In this case, it's much broader than that. In the examples that you raised, you bring you bring up the online retailers, Flex, Amazon, etc. As you think about some of the traditional manufacturing companies, are there some companies that you've identified, say, hey, they've done an outstanding job as I think about the complexity of their network or complexity of their supply base? Some that come to mind?
Well, I would mention there are several. I would mention first of all Flex, not Flexe, but Flex.
Yeah.
The company used to be called Flextronics. How quickly they moved to start making ventilators, and they didn't have parts, so they started doing it with 3D manufacturing, making the part with 3D manufacturing because they could not fast enough get the part, and because Ford and GM already got in touch with the with the main suppliers, so they started doing. I was impressed in how quickly they moved to 3D manufacturing for lots of. Now they had that capability before, but how they could use it on a grand scale with the right material and get all, it's very regulated products, so to get all the regulation right was really really interesting. The auto companies, GM and Ford, how quickly they started making ventilators. I gave the example in my presentation. I mentioned New Balance. Let me just tell you the story of New Balance. So New Balance started on a Thursday. They said, "Wow, this is serious. We're now starting to make masks." They have several advantages. One advantage, they have several factories in the United States. In fact, in Maine, and one in Massachusetts, and a few in Maine. They immediately got all the inventory in all of these places, existing inventory of parts of they used to make shoes with. They got in touch with MIT and with Massachusetts General Hospitals. Over a weekend, the supply chain people designed and started manufacturing the mask. They didn't involve, the design people were not involved. It was strictly the supply chain people. It may look this part that made by supply chain people, but the important thing is that Massachusetts General Hospital started getting, tens of thousands of these very quickly. Literally in like 3-4 days, it started making masks, and it was local. The headquarters is half an hour from MIT and 2 hours from the factories in Maine, and Massachusetts MGH, the General Hospital, is the biggest hospital in Massachusetts, is right next door. So the proximity and the fact that people kind of know each other helped a lot. But you see all these elements working together, and geez, in 4 days or so, maybe 5 days, they started making them. Not just, and another interesting thing, they did not announce that they're going to do it. Unlike, say, auto company announced we're going to make ventilators, or Flex that we're committed to making ventilators. They did not, but they did it, and then they told the marketing people in New Balance that they did it, and there was an ad that they said that I showed before. Used to make shoes, yesterday making shoes, today making masks. It was the biggest, and they did any campaign. It was the biggest social network success that New Balance ever had. I actually saw literally thousands of emails that say, I'm now going to buy New Balance shoes, from at least from the Massachusetts area. And people were so impressed that, first of all, they didn't boast it, they just did it, and they just announced this is what we did. So you see a lot, there's so many examples that it's hard to go in one presentation.
Okay, there we go. As you look at some of the fundamentals in providing greater resilience in your supply chain, you often focus on supply chain mapping and how that's so important to really effectively manage your supply chain and manage risk. Do you see this getting easier as a result of this pandemic? Do you think there'll be better cooperation from the supply base, or do you think the challenges are going to remain? Because that's always been a difficult task for many companies to map their supply chain.
Yes, and of course, Reshaping is in this business, but as we think about it, first of all, I expect it to be easier for the simple reason that one can see now how important it is. Companies because how do you manage a whack-a-mole recovery? Stuff is closed, it's open, it's closed, it's open. Okay, it's closed now. You have to know immediately who is there, what are they making, tie to the bill of material, what's the value at risk, and be able to start prioritizing, be able to tell your customers that there's a problem early in the process so they can do something about it. You can also do something about it. So it's all getting very quickly understand the magnitude of the issue, especially when we're still in a situation of opening and closing and opening and closing. This is more important than ever. So companies that invested in this are going to do better. A. B. Companies who did not are going to realize how important it is. And I also expect something as I mentioned before, the approval processes for anything that is tied with risk management and resilience became a lot easier over the last 6 months. In many companies, it was done without a big contract, just get it done immediately, getting ready. We're talking mostly about visibility software, stuff like this that could help immediately. So I expect mapping to be a cornerstone of company preparedness, because especially in this environment. So you see, if Resilink was a public company, I would invest in it. So.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, that's such an important part of really creating resiliency within your company. The next question I really ask you is, do you see the impact of tariffs and the the potential that this whole virus started in China, in Wuhan? Do you see that having a negative impact also, and/or how do you think that's going to pan out over the next couple of years?
Okay, it's interesting questions. The effect of the pandemic started already with the tariffs before, when companies are moving out of China, where companies are realigning. We now have a new president, so who knows what will happen. I mean, the funny thing, I wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, actually, the logistics part of the Wall Street Journal, saying the Chinese have to worry about Biden a lot more than Trump, because my expectation, who knows, Biden does not talk to me directly, but it's the expectation is that Biden, or let me take a step forward, the one thing that Democrat and Republican agree about is they hate China. So they look at China as a strategic competitor, if not an enemy. So especially you see what happened with China, with Hong Kong, with the South China Sea, it starts to be dicey. So the issue is the Chinese know how to handle Trump. You know, they were not really, you know, the GDP in China is still growing. They're not, don't seem overly worried about Trump. In fact, they became more belligerent during the Trump administration. I expect if the way Biden could do it is organize the world, organize the Western world, because it's one thing that the US is doing it alone with sanctions, with tariffs, but if Germany and France and the entire EU and Japan and Australia are all going to join the US, that will get Chinese attention. They just cannot afford not to. And so that's why I said the Chinese may fear a Biden administration or a more collaborative administration more than do it alone administration. Because do it alone, you know, the European were fine. I mean, they kept selling, they kept the Germans, certainly the French kept trading with China. So it's an issue, of course, going forward. What will happen with this? Is it going to be tariff or other types of pressure that are going to disrupt relationship between the US and the US, Europe, and China?
Thanks, Yossi. And there's a lot of questions coming in, so I thank the audience for their participation. In your presentation, you talked a bit about just-in-time inventory, and in the book itself, you spend quite a bit of time talking about changes that you foresee. Could you talk to the group a bit about, what do you see happening? And if you're a supply chain leader today, what are some changes you may want to consider as you look at your inventory management, your inventory control?
Okay, so I mentioned when I talk about just-in-time that there will be a lot more emphasis, even political pressure, on trying to keep more inventory, and this will be, as forget me for the cynicism, but as most government action, it will be wrong. So because there will be pressure. For example, let's think about the one area that really failed. It's a PPE, protective equipment, personal protective equipment, and some pharmaceutical materials. Actually, pharmaceutical material was not a big problem, but masks and gowns gloves was a real problem. So how do we solve it? As I mentioned before, we used to have a national stockpile. We should have a national stockpile. We should have three things. We should have a national stockpile. We should have hospitals have to have their own piles, and we should have people ready to move in. Let me talk about all three of those. An example of a strategic stockpile was the National Petroleum Reserve. We had a strategic stockpile when we had a problem with oil. How was it managed? It was not, the company managed it just in time with oil just as before, but they could not use this reserve inventory for day-to-day fluctuations. They needed presidential approval to release it. So we can use, in the US, we have a few distributors, and we can pay them to keep inventory and run it as live inventory, but they cannot go below a certain level unless they get presidential or other high-level approval. One. Two, just like we do stress tests for banks after the financial recession of 2008, 2009, we should do stress tests for hospitals. Can they withstand 1 week, 1 month without this, whatever the criterion is, but we should know where they are. Third, right now, if you see what's going on in the Midwest and other part of the country, there are not enough people. There are not enough healthcare providers. Again, modeling after the Army National Reserve, I suggest a medical national reserve. There'll be volunteers who will come, maybe retired people, maybe just volunteers who will come once a month for a weekend to work in hospitals, and every year for 2 weeks train on new staff. They're not going to become doctors or registered nurses, but they're going to release the real professionals to do more important work, and they just help. So this is kind of a three-pronged approach to fixing that type of debacle that happened and still going on. So this is one example of how to deal with it. But then I probably don't remember the original question. So.
In your book, you also mentioned the importance of linking the physical and digital movement of information and products. Do you see companies adopting technology faster, as a result of the COVID?
The answer is yes. Companies are adopting technology faster, and let me talk about a different. You mentioned technology faster. A different facet of what you said. Companies did a lot of things faster. In many cases, they cut corners, but it's okay. They work on adrenaline, and people want to help and all this. Good companies are now looking at it and say, okay, we learned a lot. How many of our processes can be done better? Do we need 27 level of approval from everybody and his uncle to get something done? Or can we focus on, and what's the risk of if something is not approved by Joe Schmo on the dock? So, but on the other hand, some things still need to be done more systemically and better, especially in large corporation. So finding a new balance between what should be done faster and what should be done systemically. Take adopting software. Some software were adopted with almost no contracting, almost no legal approval. In fact, this puts both sides at risk. But so the question is, okay, do we really need the contract that cover every eventuality since I don't know what, or can we go to somewhere in between when you have only one lawyer here and one lawyer here involved, and not approval within the legal department of all the trying to find a better balance that also we're doing things faster, but we're not increasing risk at the same time. Find a new balance. So I think that I know several companies when they have reviews like this, you see what went right, how can we adopt it to the beyond the pandemic environment, and what works, why did it work, and things like this. But you had something else in your question, I forgot.
No, that's good. And as you'd mentioned earlier in your presentation, how companies have used Zoom and other technologies to help improve communication. As you look at the stock market, obviously the market's reacted very favorably to how companies have been able to produce and keep the stocks where it needs to be. So that's good. Is there, a question that came in was around small companies and the risk associated with the pandemic and normalizing of manufacturing. What needs to be done to help support the small and medium-sized manufacturers across the world in an environment like this? Any suggestions?
Okay, first of all, they are many of them are in trouble because they are in the upstairs in the supply chain, and they are being bullwhipped, back and out. Many of them are going out of business. But there are many small companies, especially in the retail sector or close to the consumer sector, who are adjusting. I have a story in the book about a small family-owned company that was a wholesaler supplying institutions. So she supply universities. They're a small company in Massachusetts, 50 people, used to collect stuff from the local farmers in southern New Hampshire, southern Maine, and Vermont, and basically provide them to Massachusetts institution in eastern Massachusetts. This business went close to zero within a day. Talking about husband and wife team who are not sophisticated. So they were able within 2 days to they started pivoting to serving consumers. And I know about them just because I became a customer, because I like fresh food and you couldn't get it in the supermarket. So within 2 days, they started putting a PDF of what they have online. And you had to call them to tell them what you wanted. And then they had pictures with a website. You still had to call them. They were able to get, a few days later, you can put your credit card. And then they could, and then rather than put the credit card every time, 2 days later, they could keep your credit card number and you just signed in and the credit card wasn't there. Then they had the tracking and tracing because they gave the driver cell phone and they started tracking the. So what I mean is that it took them about 3 weeks to becoming a full-fledged consumer oriented, and that's why the husband was running the physical side. The wife did it while having 2 kids at home and keeping her main job because they need to keep, medical insurance. So she had the job somewhere she kept, and two little kids at home, and it was done. I told her that she is as close to a superwoman as I ever seen. But you see, Domino, for example, had developed an app and disperse it immediately to many locations when you can get your pizza and you come next to the store, and they know by GPS that you come next to the store, and somebody will come out and put the pizza in the trunk. Their sales by June went up 16%, while competitors like California Pizzas and Pizza Hut went out of business. So it's some companies were successful, some companies not. The question is how far along the digitization were already before the pandemic. As I said, the strong got stronger, the weak got weaker. It's just the prepared companies did better.
Outstanding, great example. Hey, one final question that I'll ask you. Just in the last couple of days, we've received word of the approval or the positive results on the vaccines from Madeira and from Pfizer. The next challenge will be distribution. Are we ready for it? And as you mentioned earlier, you looked at this being supply chain's finest hours. Are we going to be able to hold that banner high over the next few months as distribution worldwide takes place of billions of doses? What's your expectations?
My expectation that depending on how political it will get, it's if politics, will seep into it, then we're dead. I mean, for example, one fear is that almost 50% of Americans say they're not going to get it. I mean, this is ridiculous. I mean, if once once it's approved and you start having multiple people, okay, don't take it first, take it, and you will not get it first anyway. The first will be medical professionals anyway, and then really old people, people at risk will be the first. I would also vaccinate, people at supermarkets, the people who work the supermarket, people who work at warehouse, people who work the store. These blue collar workers should be vaccinated before people who can work, work from home. But why are you're not willing to take it? This is not going to work because the vaccines they're saying 90%, 95%. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's say it's 80%. Just like, because the numbers are so small right now. One guy got it, 9 guys didn't get it. It's 90%. Well, these are really small numbers. Literally, these are the numbers. There are 30,000 people, and 9 people out of the out of placebo got it, and 1 people out of the non-placebo of the real thing got it. So say, okay, it's 90%. Well, this is a little small sample from my taste. So I understand some of the reluctance, but we're talking to the scientists, and it looks like it's working actually. So my question is, I would like to see Biden taking one on TV. So that's one thing. I would like to see leaders convince their people to take it. So that's one thing in terms of taking it. In terms of the distribution, I'm actually optimistic. Optimistic in some sense. In the United States, in Europe, I think we'll get it done. I just got an email, I don't know if you guys got it, in CVS telling me to start making appointment for getting a vaccine shot. And they say it's free and you get $5, coupon to shop at at CVS. They're already marketing it, so they feel good that they're going to get, especially the Moderna vaccine that does not have to be at minus 70 Celsius with minus 100 Fahrenheit, but can be at 0, -4, whatever, which is not bad, and can be for 12 hours with no not a cold environment, in regular environment, and still be effective for about 12 hours, which means it can be used easily by the CVSs of the world, and can be kept in regular refrigerator for 30 days. So there's also other good news coming. I did a lot, as you saw in the book. I interviewed the Johnson & Johnson, and a lot of people from Johnson & Johnson. Something that did not make it to the book, because not everybody wants to talk about everything when I interview them. So they talk to me about something and say, but don't put it in the book. Okay, I don't, because of course I respect everybody. But the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, unlike Moderna or Pfizer, is only 1 shot, not 2, and also does not require to be very, very cold. So they do one more thing that I would trust Johnson & Johnson. The regular phase 3 tests are 30,000 people. Johnson & Johnson decided to do it for 60,000 people, just to make sure. They had the Tylenol issue, they had other issue. They understand risk management. And so, but companies seem to be doing the right things. And there's always a level. Moderna is right next door here, and I know the chairman of the board. He mentioned that we talk a lot about, is it real, is it not, should we trust it? They talk about the fact that all the statistics and all the data is monitored by third party, not by the company. The third party monitor and give the result to the company, and only then the company can announce. So I think it will be it will take time. Now, hey, let's not misunderstand. You're talking about Pfizer is talking about 20,000 in December, beginning of January, 20 million. It means 10 million people, because you need 2 of them in order to immunize yourself. So we'll see. It will take a while. And now, the question is also, will we prioritize the way we should? For example, we should not prioritize members of Congress, even though we probably will, because they can work from home. I mean, we should prioritize people who cannot work from home, and people who are really, very old, comorbidity conditions, sure, and first and foremost, healthcare workers. So I hope they'll do it in some reasonable priority as we go forward. But a lot of people are thinking about it, and I think the Biden administration will do a much better job than this is not honestly not a political statement, but they have more experienced people, they're collecting better people, and they're listening to them. So I think it will be okay.
Thanks, Yossi. And I really, again, want to thank you for taking the time today and sharing your perspective of the current situation, and again, stressing lessons learned and how we all can more effectively manage our supply chain. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Melissa.
Thank you both. That was a fantastic discussion. We really appreciate you being here today. And thank you as well to our audience for attending and sending in such great questions. We'll be sending out a recording of the webinar, so be on the lookout for that. And also, if you're one of the 20 lucky ones selected to receive a signed copy of the book, we'll be in touch via email to arrange details. And in the meantime, please take care and stay well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. And if you don't get the book, for a mere $20, you can give a gift to yourself.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.